Welcome back to the Near Memo with Mike Blumenthal and me, Greg Sterling. Today we have special guest Adam Dorfman, who is the VP of Product with BirdEye, and we're gonna have an interesting discussion about Google and AI mode and AI overviews and the future of local in the under the shifting sands of this kind of crazy time that we're in. Before we get into that, I want to thank our sponsor Gather Up for supporting the podcast. So thanks very much to them. They are a reputation company in direct competition with Adam's company BirdEye, but that's not going to enter into the conversation today, other than what I just said. So Adam, welcome to welcome back, I should say, to the podcast. How are you doing today?
Great. I'm super excited to see you too, and very happy to be back here.
That phrase "super excited" is a pet peeve of mine.
Okay, I am somewhat excited to be back here.
No. Say something that isn't like a LinkedIn cliche. Like, how do you really feel about being here?
I've been anticipating
getting more annoyed by the minute.
Okay, all right. We'll dispense with that. No, it's just whenever somebody gets a new job or something happens, people say, "I'm super excited to be X, Y, or Z," and
I take it thrilled is also a pet peeve.
Thrilled is good. Thrilled is more
okay.
authentic. Thrilled is more authentic. Grateful, thrilled, excited, looking forward to it. Those are all acceptable phrases. Okay, now Mike is getting really annoyed with me. I don't usually drink coffee, but I've had some today, so that's what's going on. Okay, so Adam, what is your assessment of the state of local in the midst of this shit show that is happening in front of our eyes? What would you?
It's changing extremely rapidly. AI has certainly changed the conversation. It's changed how people are thinking about retrieving information. But when it comes to local, not sure. I feel like much of what's being stated is somewhat overblown today. There's so much happening. And if you think about where things were a year ago or 2 years ago versus now, it's been a lot of improvements in what we're seeing, a lot of differences in how we're seeing things. And I expect that to continue to happen. So while much is the same, things are evolving quickly.
Well, so define, improvements and the changes that you're referring to. What are those in your mind?
Yeah, so just these are all ad hoc personal queries that I've been doing on the different AI models and seeing what kind of local results are coming back. And at the end of the day, they're not good. They're still not nearly as good as Google Maps or Apple Maps if you're doing a recovery search potentially, or a discovery search on Yelp or some other directories that are already there. I tend to have much better luck, but they're not so horribly bad as they once were. There was a period of time where you would go to ChatGPT and do a search for a sushi restaurant near me or a sushi restaurant in a neighborhood like Lincoln Square, Chicago, and you would see hallucinated restaurants. You would see restaurants that were 30 miles away, which might as well be in a different state if you live in Chicago. So there are certainly improvements, which isn't to say that what exists now is good.
Okay, so you were referring to changes in local results on AI platforms exclusively with that comment.
Yes,
you're not talking about AI mode or AI overviews.
And I would like to add a counterposition to that. As a rural searcher, you are an urban searcher where near me is very critical. For me, Google's local algorithm, which focuses on near businesses, I know all the businesses that are within 5 or 8 miles of me. It's when I want to get a job done and I don't have enough businesses in that population, Google starts failing. And an area where I have found ChatGPT to do an excellent job is these complex sort of, I'm willing to travel 2 hours for task X. What is within 2 hours of me that is excellent? And it can take that and parse it and say, here are the cities that are within 2 hours of you. Here are the top businesses in those markets. And here's several we think you should try that maybe weren't quite what you said. So it depends on where you're at and what your search is, whether or not it's as good as Google. That thing that I just spoke of is one of the promises of AI, is to break out of the constraints of a 2-mile radius, right? That local has imposed on us, which is a very rigid sort of thing that I don't always, sometimes you want it and sometimes you don't.
So let me give, no, that rant is good. Let me give you another sort of example in a different context of local, which is travel, which is often not considered local. That's sort of supportive of Mike's argument. I agree, Adam, that if you're just doing general local searches in ChatGPT or any of the others, they're questionable. It's uncertain. Sometimes they're okay, sometimes they're not. But for travel and travel planning, I think something like ChatGPT is radically better than what you're experiencing on Google. I mean, Google is good for specific, like if you're looking for location, how close is this hotel to such and such a place? Google is good for that. Google Maps is good for that. If you're looking for pricing information, quick pricing information, it's decent for that. But if you're trying to do any planning, like I want to give me an itinerary and show me, compare these hotels and asking questions about the reviews at the hotels or any of that kind of stuff. And what's the best mode of transportation to get from here to there? Is it bus? Is it train? Is it faster to drive? All of that stuff is so orders of magnitude better on ChatGPT than what you currently get on TripAdvisor or Google or any of that. It's a kind of holistic tool that Google does not offer. Now, AI mode can do some of that stuff, but not as well, at least at
Don't
this
you think
point.
this is what Google is striving for? This sort of full
Of
funnel
course.
experience of here are the big issues that you're confronting, and then here are the specific places. And in some sense, they have the best local database of anybody and have that grounded reality. They don't hallucinate because these are real entities. What they haven't done yet is built it into a reasonable presentation in AI or even a reasonable funnel flow in AI.
I mean, the interesting question about Google will be, how do they bring all these things together? I mean, they've said that AI mode is the future. But they're also going to bring AI mode into, or whatever's behind AI mode, some specialized version of Gemini 2.5, into quote unquote core search. But what you have now is you've got Gemini over here, the standalone thing, and you've got AI mode, which is some version of Gemini, but modified. And then you've got AI overviews and the regular, SERP below that. I think integrating that, if they plan to integrate it, I mean, I would imagine that their roadmap includes some integration of these things into a sort of a single unitary experience. But I don't know what that looks like. I mean, it's kind of an incoherent thing right now.
Yeah, it's an example you gave, Greg, is spot on. When I was in London last year, my flight got canceled. I was going to take like a 9 a.m. flight out of London back to Chicago, and it was more or less canceled. It was like an 8-hour delay, and I spent about 30 minutes frantically trying to rebook a sooner flight, and then realized, oh, I could take a day in London. First thing I did was went to ChatGPT and asked for a list of things to do that morning, and it came up with a great example. But then, of course, I had to shift to Google Maps to figure out how best to get there, what order I should go in, am I going to have time for all of these things, and so on. But yeah, you're 100% right. But I wouldn't go to Google for that. To follow on what you said, both of you said, going to Google for that right now, the amount of whether it's AI overviews or things like that, it's just not as clean. And it's really hard to parse through and understand what it is that you want to look for and find what it is. So yeah, I think they're going to need to make a decision on how important is it for them to keep traditional search results? Are they going to bifurcate? Is there going to be like a tab at the top where you just click back and forth between the two? They're going to need something to help users with this, because right now it's not a good experience.
Well, and I mean, this is something I started talking about before the podcast started. In some of my recent AI mode searches, when I first got access to AI mode, it was kind of garbage. There were some interesting things about it, but it wasn't worth using other than sort of testing it out. It wasn't worth using. Now it's gotten much better. It's faster. The local stuff is better. But in my recent queries there, the pages all sort of have the same pattern. It's 100% GBP links. And then on the right, where they have a little, whatever that's called, source box, whatever, vertical sort of drop down that's expandable, you get Yelp and you get some vertical specific directories there very often. There are no websites there that I've seen recently. It's all directories. But if you go into the main body of it, it's links and then a kind of horizontal pack, and then more links, and it's all, every single thing, and the text links and the images duplicate one another.
Yeah, I noticed that too.
Right, which is weird and sort of, I assume, will change. You click on one of those and you get a knowledge panel that shows up, and it's GBP, and there are no organic listings there at all. And so that's an interesting thing. Who knows if that'll
Well,
remain the
we've
case.
seen this behavior in two other situations, and I think there's a reason for it. This behavior, if you look right now at cocktail bars in New York City, you see
It's an
AI
AI
organizers.
overview.
It's an
It's
AI
very
overview,
similar.
and it is
Yep.
predominantly packs, pack after pack after
Right.
pack, with the occasional directory interspersed. And we saw it in Europe almost 2 years ago, where they started including 2 packs in the search results. So clearly, Google has a lot of incentives and they have the best local database. So there's a lot pointing towards them self-preferencing even more, assuming they can get away with it
100%.
in these results. And
95%.
I think they're struggling through the interfaces, but in the end, what we see with this AI overview of cocktail lounges and what you're seeing in there is some variation of what we're going to get, which is a shit ton of local everywhere, right? And they're self-referenced local. And if I were Google, I'd be doing the same thing. I mean, why send somebody off when you can keep them?
Well, they're playing to their strength, obviously. But I mean, there's a whole conversation about whether it flies in Europe and whether GBP, the sort of local pack after local pack, is self-preferencing that's not going to pass muster there. But let's defer that conversation to later. But it's an interesting thing because it raises a question. We've got a situation where all the third-party research is showing clicks are way down when AI overviews appear. And we had Kevin Indig and Eric von Buskirk to talk about their research, and their one of their arguments is based on sort of observing user behavior. You've got to just get away from clicks. You just stop focusing on clicks. Clicks are like the potato chip of search metrics. It's like they taste good, but they're empty. There's no nutrition there. There's no substance there. So you've got sort of AI overviews showing up with greater frequency, including in local, mostly for informational style queries, but they overshadow the pack, Whitespark did some research where 2/3 of local queries showed AI overviews and 1/3 showed packs. The transactional queries or the commercial queries show packs, and AI overviews seem to be sort of semi-mutually exclusive. But nonetheless, when those things show up, it's like a black hole, and organic stuff gets pushed further and further down, especially on mobile. So it's like, what should marketers really be? Let's talk about what marketer tactics should they be focusing on? What is going to survive? Where is the ground firm here in all of this? And let's start with the reputation. Obviously, you have worked in reputation for a long time. So
you're talking
do you
to
think?
me? You want me
Yes.
to say, yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so yes, I think reviews are going to continue to be as important, likely more important than before, if you want to be visible in these results. And similar to what it sounded like you were speaking about on an earlier edition of this podcast with testimonials on a website, I think the recency of reviews and the content within reviews is going to be referenced more with AI overviews, as well as with...
Because they're based on words, not on links, essentially,
100%.
is what you're saying.
Yeah. And if you think about how best to return, let's just use the example of things that I want to do in an afternoon or in the morning in London, and I was to write something that had that word in it. If those reviews, and let's call it responses as well too, are being indexed and crawled and ingested by these AI models, it would make an awful lot of sense to me that they're going to continue, they're going to start utilizing that when returning results and determining which business to appear. So the standard practice, local search best practice of requesting reviews, responding to reviews, listening to those reviews, improving operationally, I don't think that changes at all. In fact, it may be something you want to potentially double down on.
And from my point of view, it expands both the need for first-party reviews and the need for additional third-party reviews so that you can get on the top 10 best list at Yelp and the top 10 best list at TripAdvisor.
Other sources, not just Google, right? Other relevant,
other trusted sources, not the penny ante top 10 lists, but the top 10 lists that are going to be referenced by level players. In other words, the ones at Yelp, TripAdvisor, the better directories.
Right. So for your vertical, yes. Go ahead.
I would just say to that, when I do queries right now on these AI engines, I see those lists being heavily like influencing what the results are right now. I mean, they are very, very high. Going back to the antitrust litigation and so on, like even in AI mode, like Google, it feels like is utilizing Yelp almost exclusively, maybe as a way to help soften whatever penalties are coming down their way or prevent those. I don't see that necessarily being the way of the future, though, because the results that I see when based on top 10 lists are not necessarily the best results. Google Maps, at least in an urban environment, because Mike, you made a really good point about urban versus rural searching. In an urban environment, the Google Maps results are heads and tails better than what the AI mode results are that were based on what exists in Yelp top 10 lists.
Right. So we can say with confidence that reviews are going to be as important, if not more important, going forward. First party reviews, third party reviews in key directories or key places. I think that's a consensus that we can agree on.
I would make one other point about reviews, Greg, and that is that if the top of funnel query path journey fragments more or additionally, people are still going to use Google Maps and Apple Maps for their final directional.
Well, and also for validation, right? If somebody
for validation, but the role of reviews and validation in that situation would be a negative. In other words, oh, I didn't realize this person had bad reviews. You know, they go through the process, whatever it leads you to this. In other words, it could cause you to reject a decision as well. So Google Maps and Apple Maps to a lesser extent will always have a role. The question is whether Google will be able to dominate the funnel above it or not, right? I don't think there's any question that between Google Maps and local search, they're going to dominate the low part of the funnel for a very long time, meaning that a lot of things we're doing are still very important. It's the question of what's happening above that. If you're a newspaper, I don't care what Kevin Indig says, a click's important to you. But for most of us, we just want a freaking phone call, right?
Well, if your model is based on ad impressions, you need those clicks, right? Obviously, you're not going to get conversions in the same way. I mean,
so all the turmoil that we're seeing is above sort of Google Maps in the funnel, and that's really what's at stake here, I think.
So Google is the dominant local review source, sort of speaking from a horizontal perspective, and so people are always going to use Google reviews. You know, that's what our behavioral research reveals. It's what anecdotal information reveals. I mean, directions will go to Apple Maps or to Google Maps, but I mean, Google may see, this is the stuff that Rand Fishkin has been documenting. Increasing percentage of queries are brand specific queries. So there's discovery, that happens on TikTok or it happens on Instagram or it's word of mouth or whatever the source is. And then people come into Google and they're validating. Somebody just referred me to a painter to paint my house. So I want to make sure that they're not shitty by looking at Google reviews to validate that kind of scenario. So we have fragmentation of the brand discovery piece, and we have more and more brand queries on Google and more bottom of the funnel sort of activity. I mean, I think that's a pattern that's been emerging for quite a long time. Some people will continue to start with Google, best dog trainers near me, best whatever, but there'll be this sort of informational fragmentation or discovery fragmentation, probably. I mean, we've been, that's the Prabhakar Raghavan comment, 40% or whatever of young people go to Instagram or TikTok to look for restaurants.
Speaking of talking about tactics, and this goes a little bit further beyond that, you keep hearing about add schema to your website. Always been best practice from a local search perspective. And a lot of what people are talking about right now, it feels like, is schema as relates to FAQs or content and so on. Adding reviews marked up is a really good, it's always been best practice. Go ahead and put the reviews on your site. But if you have first party, like Mike just said, let's call them testimonials and streaming those, absolutely worth doing and marking up as well too. I think that's something that all of the chatbots or all of the AI models are looking at. A year ago, if you did a search on ChatGPT and saw where they were getting information from, it was a bunch of third tier, fourth tier directory sites like happycow.com or whatever. And I don't see that very much at all anymore. I see those top tier sites like Yelp, TripAdvisors, but even more importantly, the businesses' websites being a key source of data for these AI models.
And so it has to be simpler HTML because their bots can't parse JavaScript yet.
Yeah, they're not going to execute JavaScript like Google does. You're 100% right. Yep. Today.
Google will crawl it for Gemini for purposes of AI mode or AI overviews or whatever. But in terms of ChatGPT, Right. It has to be simple. I mean, let's acknowledge the future conversation about agents and whatever havoc they may wreak on traffic to websites or behavior. That's something for another day. One of the there was an interview by The Verge of Sundar Pichai that I wrote about in our most recent newsletter, and he was saying what happens when the internet just becomes a bunch of databases that agents kind of read and then deliver information to you. But that's a whole other speculative conversation. So Schema reviews obviously GBP, obviously sort of invest in directories that are critical for your vertical. Bing Places is something that I think is important for ChatGPT. A lot of people have neglected that, and now that's sort of returned as an important thing to pay attention to. Schema. What else do we think is really going to sort of be semi-evergreen here?
Brand mentions that are not links, web references, right? Beyond structured directories, news articles, public relations, all that sort of stuff for me has always been, but will continue to be important.
I think a better way to maybe think about this question is what's not going to be important, because I saw an article posted recently in our internal Slack group that was, here are 10 best practices for optimizing your AI presence if you're a local business. And when I read through it, every time I saw AI, I just mentally changed it with local search. It was basically a how-to guide to optimize for local search in general. And when I think about what's not going to be as important, not sure. I mean, I think social media, for instance, might become more important in some ways if these AI models can access and see what social media posts are out there. I could see them being similar to how Google is now. And I saw this in the AI mode for the first time on desktop, where if you have they're pulling in images and posts from third-party social media sites, I absolutely would see all of these AI models and chatbots referencing those and connecting the dots and putting them together too, because that's one of the things that they're really good at.
Well, and social media is really important, I think, for brand discovery, also increasingly important. What else? What else is not important, Adam?
What's not important? I think today.
Well, what's good? What's good? I mean, there's a lot of
link building will become less important.
Yes.
That's a question for you.
Yes.
So link building, I think, is going to become less important. I don't know that I'd want to put my stake in the ground on something that this early. However, what I will say about websites, because we were talking about that earlier, and how you're not seeing organic results anymore. You're just seeing GBP profiles in AI mode, links to those. That doesn't mean that your organic optimization, your on-site optimization, technical optimization, link building, and so on, isn't influencing these models from understanding what's going on with your website and how likely they are to get to that website as well, too. So similar to how for a while there was talk with local businesses, do you even need a website? Like, is a Facebook page enough? And the truth is, it could be, but the reality is having a website, even if people don't access it as much, is still best practices and has a lot of positive benefits.
Well, I do think it's useful, absolutely, for people. And
I mean, I can give you an example of how Google is using it in local. I work in the Google forums, and there was a guy who came in and said, Google keeps adding all these services back to my Google business profile, and I keep deleting them. And I went to his site, and every one of the services was a sidebar menu choice. I said, here's where they're getting them, word for word, from your website, bringing them into GBP. If you don't want those services in GBP, get rid of them on your website, or at least remove the links, right? So, I mean, as the data source, the website will retain its importance. The question becomes, will it be less of a smaller part of your funnel going forward or not? Just sort of accelerate as being a data source for various other bots and other things.
I think the answer is it depends. It depends on what industry you're in. I mean, we did a bunch of research in construction, home remodeling, and Europe, and those people, 3 countries, and people went to the websites. They wanted to see. They were on Google. They were on GBP. They wanted to see images, and they wanted to see the work of those contractors on websites. And so it's very clear that in some situations, websites really matter, and they really do impact a conversion. It's not going to be, it may be the case that I don't need to go to a restaurant website to decide if I want to go there. Maybe I'm looking at menus, but maybe not. Maybe I just need to look at proximity and, reviews or what have you. But in the case of a higher consideration purchase, I may really want to spend a lot of time looking at, certain kinds of details on a website, or getting information from a website.
And I think that's always been the case when you think of like healthcare and so on. More often than not, you're going to want to actually see the hospital's website or the doctor's
Or the
website to
doctors,
learn more
right?
about them if
Exactly.
you are
In
planning
the
to go.
doctors, we saw a lot of attitudinal needs met by the website. Gee, what do these people look like? Do they have a big, tall, white male doctor standing out in front of a bunch of women? Those kinds of concerns to gender, to race, to all that stuff is hard to answer in Google because Google is too generic.
Yep.
That's right.
They don't have all of
That's
those.
right.
They accept a lot of data points, but they don't always surface them. And there's some fundamental ones that are often missing, like languages spoken potentially, or whatever.
Right. Mike, were you going to say something? Okay. All right. So now let's talk a little bit before we end about metrics, tracking, measurement. We alluded to the conversation we had about the reliability of clicks, or whether clicks should be disregarded. There's a lot of conversation about clicks are down, but conversions are up, or revenue is up, but clicks are down. Clicks are in shorter supply these days. What should businesses or marketers be doing? What should they be tracking? How should they be tracking it?
So I'll start. One thing that I'm thinking about and I'm often discussing with my coworkers is how do we track outcomes instead of these top of funnel ones? And I think you're right. Clicks can be directionally accurate, but clicks can go down and revenue can go much higher as well too. Same with phone calls. Phone calls, click to phone calls, great. But if you're suddenly generating phone calls from places that don't offer that data, that doesn't mean you're getting less phone calls. You're just getting less phone calls that you can actually track and could have zero impact on how well your business is actually doing. So whenever possible, I would be looking for actual revenue data or KPIs that are highly, highly correlated with how much money that you as a business owner is making.
I think Guy had a good point in our monthly sort of mastermind group office hours that we had at Near Media last week, which is that you need to be correlating those to surveys of your clients that reflect how they felt they got there as well, right? That looking at the last click attribution or other metrics was meaningless without validating it against what clients were saying in an ongoing way, how they found you. So, adding to that some sort of persistent, consistent survey of your clients as to how they found you. This will help you understand what's last click, but also where if your marketing arena is fragmenting, where to put the resources back, right? So without it, it becomes very difficult to understand. Apple is totally obfuscated to people, right? To some extent, other channels are as well. And you just don't really know where people are finding you.
Well, this in a way is, go ahead, Adam.
Yeah. I think the other thing that's coming back, for those of us that have been doing SEO for an obscenely long time, like I think all three of us have, ranking reports were always something that those of us who have been doing a long time kind of roll our eyes at a lot, because there's very oftentimes no correlation between how well you're ranking on one keyword versus how much search traffic you're actually getting. However, I am becoming more convinced that having an understanding of what your visibility is, especially on these new AI models, and keeping track of that as a way to understand do you need to, like, how successful are you in terms of this? Because there is not an easy way to track how much traffic you're getting, how many phone calls you're generating. You can't really control and shoot a call tracking number for ChatGPT, right? Like they don't accept that. So utilizing a tool that will allow you to understand how visible you are in these AI models, I think is something to consider as well.
But how does that even work in the context of the intense personalization that is going on within these models?
Well, that's the thing to figure out. So proxies, continuing to search from different locations, et cetera. There's ways to do that.
People are doing personalized searches, like itinerary for Lisbon, Portugal, or I want a vendor who can do these things. You're getting these personalized results, but they're drawn from non-personalized data. It's not best tree trimmer near me. It's arborist who blah 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 blah. You still need to, you're still underneath those personalized queries. You're still, you're talking about tracking, Mike. all right, I'm going to abandon that train of
I was
thought.
talking about ranking or visibility.
Right. There's no
Becomes
consistency.
difficult to measure in any real way when you're dealing with AI. One reason is they randomize answers. The other is they personalize intensely. And Google clearly is moving in that direction with so tracking those, I'm just curious how Adam sees that as how to actually.
So all you do is run queries like whatever like do a keyword query, or it's a prompt in this case, or you can do a search and say, what do you know about my business and how does that compare to the others, and et cetera, and just continue receiving information like that. From a competitive analysis tool, these like ChatGPT is awesome. Like the amount of information you can get on how to better optimize your information online, how best to improve operationally, and so on. Like there's all these tools that have been doing this for a while, and these AI models are incredibly efficient at doing this very quickly.
So how do you see this affecting BirdEye, for example, from a product point of view? I know you guys do reviews, you do business listings, you do centralized listing management, uploading of photos. How do you see it affecting product direction broadly?
Yeah.
You don't have to get into specifics of the next feature you're going to release, although if you want to, that'd be good.
Yeah. So it's incredibly exciting. I think not just at BirdEye, but most software companies right now are fundamentally shifting in terms of not just what they decide to build, but how they decide to build it. And this idea that agents are going to take over the world or whatever when it comes to SaaS technology or software development and so on is a bit hyperbolic, but not exactly inaccurate either. The amount of efficiencies you can get from a development standpoint is like using Copilot and so on. It's very high. However, just as exciting, the ability now to essentially build what could be considered a local search expert sitting at your side within the platform, feeding you really high quality, well curated information becomes possible as well too. And so that's where my focus is. That's where we're moving towards. The amount of work that previously was required for these, I'm thinking more enterprise and these local SEOs that are trying to manage dozens or hundreds or thousands of businesses at once. The efficiencies that these tools can bring is significant and incredibly exciting as well too.
Well, it's also available to small businesses, but nobody has really built that yet, right? I mean, the best practices that can be baked into these systems would be even more helpful for local businesses.
100%. Yeah. And I agree with that. When you think of these SEOs, I'm not trying to slag anybody that's doing good work, because there's plenty of SEOs that work with small businesses that do very good work. But a lot of times,
it's okay. We can slag some SEOs. It's all right. You have our permission.
But we also know that a lot of them are doing busy work and like running reports on things that's not going to move the needle.
And taking advantage of small business ignorance of these things to
exactly
sort of
right.
build them.
Yeah. And the difference is when you would receive these technical audits for a website, and there would be 3 things in there that were must do's, and everything else are like one of, do you need title tags? Or sorry, do you need link titles? Do you need how optimized do your alt tags need to be, et cetera? It's a lot of diminishing returns. But with these AI models, being able to say, this is going to have high impact, and this is why, this is the data that it resides upon. This is exactly not that you need to add photos, but here are 3 photos that are missing from your profile. Here's what we would suggest that you shoot. Here's like the content that should exist within them. Here is a description for that photo, and go ahead and do that. That was not scalable before. There's no technology that could do that. And that's suddenly becoming possible, which I find incredibly exciting.
Yeah, I mean,
small and large businesses.
How do you tie the AI though back to outcomes? In other words, you're only seeing really distant proxies of outcomes in your silo. And unless the customer is saying these are the outcomes back into your system, how does it know to make a recommendation?
You're saying, where's the feedback loop?
It
measures that validates?
That validates that the outcomes are improving.
Yeah. So you can, ideally, it's going to be through their CRM or their POS or whatever, and you're going to get actual revenue or lead data and so on. But you can use, like I said before, visibility reports, ranking reports, and so on. Even if clicks are going down, if suddenly you were previously ranked at number 7 in Google Maps, and by doing these things, you're now at 3, and you're suddenly in the local pack, that's a pretty good outcome at the end of the day.
I think you're exactly right for enterprises, Adam, where there's a tie-in to the CRM or other tools like that, point of sale, and you can track those things and correlate them with different changes that have been made or different other. I mean, you're never going to get, the fallacy of the click is that it was a precision KPI, right? And because it could be tracked, people sort of made these false assumptions about its accuracy it was always a proxy for other things. But now what we're doing is we're having to return to older methods or older kind of more ambiguous, more variable methods, like media mix modeling is something that has kind of come back into vogue, at least for enterprises. And there's a sort of a probabilistic dimension to that and other things. But what you have today is you have the ability to tie into a CRM or a POS and feed that information back into an AI system. And that's different than what existed in the past, even though you still need to ask your customers and figure out what they think that they're doing to get to you. All right, so let's wind down here. I think this is a conversation that we'll continue to have again and again and again as things evolve. Any sort of final thoughts on what local marketers? I mean, Mike, your opinion was local is kind of going to be the same as it has been. Less radical change in local. Any final thoughts on what local marketers should be focused on or doing?
Running a great business instead of trying to find a silver bullet that's going to solve their ranking issues at Google.
For sure.
I'll add in the SEO adage that when something changes algorithmically or something new gets announced, just keep doing what you've been doing, because everything that we're doing now is essentially what we were doing and recommending 10 years ago, 15 years ago. It's going to continue to evolve. It's going to continue to change slightly. But again, all signs point to, if you are doing local best practices when it comes to local search optimization, you're well positioned to also do well within the AI responses.
I would add, get more feedback from your customers to validate your work, right? I mean, I think outcomes, as Adam points out, are the critical metric. And I think people need to be relating those back to their marketing efforts so that they can decide if they need to change priorities between point A, point B, point C in terms of mid-funnel stuff. Clearly, local is going to be local, but how the person gets to your Google Maps or your Apple Maps is really the question that's going to be coming forward. And you need a way to measure if that's changing. Right.
I mean, I want to reinforce what you said about run a great business. I mean, I think that is basic advice that people often don't focus on. I mean, deliver a great product or service, good customer service, ethically, with integrity, and look at the long term. And marketing is designed to amplify those things. It's not designed to compensate for those things. I mean, I think too often this SEO discussion revolves around tips and tricks and how to manipulate these, I can put my content in LinkedIn Pulse and then rank number one on ChatGPT. And, this is, I mean, I understand the psychology behind it, but it's just depressing to see that kind of continuous conversation. I mean, people should really be focused on do a good job with your business and then marketing best practices to amplify that, to get the word out. But don't think that you can take a shitty business or bad behavior and use tips and tricks to compensate for it, even though that's worked on Google, because Google doesn't know, Google has to rely on these proxies. Google doesn't understand content. Google doesn't understand the reality of what the reviews are saying so much. So anyway, Adam, thank you very, very much for being with us. Interesting conversation as always. We look forward to doing it again at some not too distant future point.
Well, it was a thrill to be on this.
Yes, thank you.
Well,
you can't be super excited in retrospect. You have to be basking in the afterglow of this conversation.
Yep, absolutely.
All right. Thanks for being on, and thanks again to our sponsor GatherUp for supporting.